All right. Good morning, everyone. Welcome back. Let's do a little review now. We have learned quite a bit, and hopefully you remember all that. Try not to look it up because, obviously, you pull up the page or notes and read from it. I know you can read, but just think about it. First of all, what is a statement? Yeah.
Something that's true or false.
Something that is true or false? Huh? What's the word? Yeah.
A sentence.
A sentence which is true or false. It's not just something. It is a sentence. It is a meaningful collection of words which is true or false, and we call it statement. What is an argument? That kind of develops the first part. We just established what is a statement. What is an argument? Is it one statement? Yes. No. But we just talked about statement, right? Why do you suddenly switch to sentences? Not all sentences are statements, right? Would sentences such as question be part of an argument? No. So instead of saying sentences, you should say what? Statement. It is a group of statements. Some sentences may be there, but they are not statements, so they wouldn't count. But it is a group of statements, and what's happening with this statement? All of them making a claim? Yeah.
It's a collection of statements where one or more of the statements is claiming to support one of the others.
Exactly. Well, the other one.
The other one.
The other. It doesn't have to be more than one there, but yeah. So at the minimum, we have to have two statements. There should be a connection between them, and that one or more should support, claim to support the other one. That's what argument is. Could be more than one here, but you need to have this connection between them. And what kinds of arguments are there? What did we talk about last time? Inductive and deductive, what's the difference? Remember?
Inductive is when it's very possible, whereas deductive.
What is possible?
The argument is possible.
The argument is possible. Conclusion, the connection. The connection between the premise and the conclusion based on probability. So, yeah, that makes the conclusion possible, but that's not the best way to say it. It's based on probability, but deductive are based on what? Necessity. Yeah, this connection in inductive argument is based on probability, in deductive based on necessity. Okay, and finally, what's the purpose of logic? What are we doing here? We started from that. Very simple, to distinguish good arguments from bad ones. Remember, that's what we are doing. Okay, so this is everything kind of briefly on one page. Statement, sentence which is true or false, argument, group of statements, one or more which claim to provide support for the other one. Arguments can be deductive and inductive, and the purpose of logic to figure out which ones are good, which ones are bad. Great. Now let's look at these two arguments and try to answer this question based on common sense. Are they good or bad? First argument is all flowers are dogs, all tigers are flowers, so all tigers are dogs. And the second one, all flowers are plants, all daisies are plants, so all daisies are flowers. Let's first look at the top one. Is it good or bad? Bad. Why? Why? Okay, but let's look at two different questions. And from now on, we will be separating these questions. One question is, are they true or false? The other question is, do the premises support the conclusion? Because remember what we do. And I told you last time it's difficult, but this is what we have to do. How do we analyze the argument?
About the premises support the conclusion.
No, yeah, but what's the first step to determine?
Indicator words?
Indicators. No. You assume premises to be true. And I even said, you can assume the unicorn is in the soup. Can you assume that all flowers are dogs? Yeah, why not? Can you assume that all tigers are flowers? Some parallel universe, maybe it is. Assuming that, would it then follow that all tigers are dogs?
Yes.
Yes. So that, despite the fact that it is all not true, that actually is a good argument. Because if we look at it again with our circles, if this is a circle in the first case of all the dogs, first premise says all flowers are dogs. So where are we going to place the circle of flowers?
Inside.
Inside, right? That would be all the flowers. That's what first premise tells us. And then all tigers are flowers, so where are we going to put another circle for tigers?
Inside flower.
Inside flowers, exactly. That would be our tigers. And when we do that, we can see that the conclusion is supported with strict necessity. Assuming all flowers are dogs and all tigers are flowers, all tigers would be dogs. The circle of tigers would always be inside the bigger circle of dogs. Let's look at another one. All flowers are plants, all daisies are plants, so all daisies are flowers. Is it good or bad? Again, if we start with true or false, that actually is all true. Right? All flowers are plants. That true? All daisies are plants. That's true. Yep. And the conclusion is true. All daisies are indeed flowers. But if we're going to approach it from this point of view, two premises for the conclusion, you'll see that they don't. All flowers are plants, all daisies are plants, so great. If this is the plants, what the first premise tells us is this would be one circle of flowers, right? Just like in the previous example. But the other circle could be anywhere. The daisies are plants, great. They can be here. Daisies. Flowers are plants, all daisies are plants. Does it tell us that all daisies are flowers? No. We know it from real world, but forget the real world. That's the difficult part. The truth and falsity of the premises always gets in the way. When you analyze an argument, you should forget about it. And in fact, when we get into formal logic, we'll just replace it with some letters like A, B, C or something. Is it true that A is B? I don't know. Depends on what's A, what's B. Okay, so this is the situation. We discovered that both of these arguments are good from one point of view, but bad from another point of view. In the first one, premises are all false, but they support the conclusion. In the second one, premises are all true, but they do not support the conclusion. So what does it tell you? That the classification good and bad is not good enough for our purposes. We have to come up with better classification, which is what we're going to do today. This is two separate questions, and we have to understand very well that they are separate. Do premises support the conclusion? Are they true or false? The first question is more important for us in logic, because if the premises do not support the conclusion, we don't care whether they're true or false. It's a junk argument to begin with. Truth and falsity of these premises doesn't matter. Now, of course, if they do support the conclusion, we may ask the separate question, are they actually true? But remember, logic does not ask this question. What part of philosophy asks the question of truth and falsity? Epistemology. Epistemology. And even though in critical thinking we talk more about it, in this class we will not spend much time on epistemology because it's symbolic logic. So we are more concerned with the structure of the argument rather than with truth and falsity, which is, by the way, a very complicated topic. So first, let's look at deductive argument. In a deductive argument, we have the concept of validity, which is one of the most important concepts and difficult for many students. What exactly is a valid deductive argument? Valid deductive arguments are the arguments in which it is impossible for the conclusion to be false, given that the premises are true. It's a simple definition, and it's important to understand. So what does it tell us? We are assuming premises to be true. In a valid argument, in that case, conclusion will always be true. That's what valid argument is. Premises, and I do two premises, but there could obviously be one or five or whatever. But it's just easier, just like in syllogism. Assuming premises to be true, conclusion will always be true. If there's any chance whatsoever, like in this case, that we have true premises but false conclusion, that would be invalid argument. So the concept is connected to truth and falsity, but in a rather abstract way. You assume premises to be true and then see whether there's any chance for the conclusion to be false. You don't actually care very much in case of validity whether the premises are true in real life. There's no middle ground. All deductive arguments are either valid or invalid. Let's look at this example. All television networks are media companies. NBC is a television network. Therefore, NBC is a media company. So first step always is assuming premises to be true. It's easy here because they actually are true, right? Assuming premises are true, is it possible for the conclusion to be false? No. If you pay careful attention, that argument actually has the same form as this argument. Except instead of dogs, we have what? Media companies. And instead of flowers, we have television networks. And instead of tigers, we have NBC. Valid form, valid argument. So that's what we mean when we say it is valid. Let's look at this example. All automakers are computer manufacturers. United Airlines is an automaker. Therefore, United Airlines is a computer manufacturer. Let's assume premises to be true. Would conclusion be always true in that case? Is it a valid argument? Yes. Why?
The same form.
It's the same form exactly. Except now we have computer manufacturers here, and we have automakers here, and we have United Airlines here. But it doesn't matter what we put here. We can, like I said, put A, B, and C, and that would be still valid form of an argument, whatever your A, B, and C are. Okay, so some important points about validity. Validity is not something which is determined by actual truth and falsity of the premises and the conclusion in real life. But to make it a little bit confusing, there is a caveat here. So what is exactly the caveat? There is one arrangement of truth and falsity in real life which can tell us whether the argument is invalid. It cannot tell us whether the argument is valid. But if we see premises true and the conclusion false, we can say the argument is invalid. Why? Well, there's a simpler answer. It's actually a little bit of a trick question. By definition of validity, because if you go back to the definition of validity, it will tell you that valid argument is one in which it is impossible for the true premises to be true and the conclusion false. So if you know premises are true and conclusion false, can it be valid? No, by definition it cannot be. It has to be invalid. So that's the only combination. It's very bad practice to try to figure out validity based on truth and falsity. But in some situation you can, especially at this point because we don't have better tools. And pretty much all this class is about the tools we can use to determine validity. So let's look at this table and try to remember and understand it. This is every combination of truth and falsity. Premises true, conclusion true. What do we know about validity? Nothing. We don't know anything about validity. Just because premise is true and the conclusion true doesn't tell us the argument is valid. Premise is false, conclusion true. What do we know about validity? Nothing. Premise is false, conclusion false. What do we know about validity? Nothing. None of it tells us anything about validity except one combination. True premises, false conclusion, argument has to be invalid. Right? By definition. Now, what about the second part? Do we not care at all whether the premises are true? Yes, we care. And for this, we have a separate term, soundness. Sound argument is the one in which argument is valid to begin with, and it has all true premises. Note that if the argument is invalid, it's always unsound, regardless of whether premises are true or false. But if the argument is valid, which is always the first step, the second thing we might ask, are these premises actually true or false? Which then becomes more difficult because you have to know things about history, geography, and all this other stuff. But like I said, for this class, especially if you don't know something, you can just Google it or something, because I mean, you may not even know whether George Washington was beheaded, and I honestly, for our purposes, don't care if you do. It's not a history class. You take history class, they will tell you everything about George Washington, and they will demand that you remember all that. But here, that's not an important part. So this is an example of sound argument, right? All flowers are plants. All daisies are flowers. Therefore, all daisies are plants. If you actually draw the circles as we did before, you will see that it is valid. Since it is valid, we can ask the second question, but is it true? And then we will discover from biology, I guess in this case, that it also is true. All flowers are indeed plants, all daisies are indeed flowers, and all daisies are indeed plants. So everything true, argument valid, so that would be a sound argument. Here's some interesting examples of combinations, right? Because sometimes you have difficulty with this concept, and let's take a brief look at them. Of course, this is all valid arguments. This is all invalid arguments. This is true premises, true conclusion, true premises, false conclusion, false premises, true, and true, false, false. So everything false. Now, for true premises and true conclusion, argument can be valid or invalid. This is example of valid. This is example of invalid. Of course, if it is invalid, it is unsound, even though everything is true, because all invalid arguments are unsound. True premises, false conclusion cannot be valid by definition, so nothing here. You can't give an example of something which doesn't exist. But, of course, you can have invalid argument here is true premises and true and false conclusion. Then you can have valid or invalid arguments with false premises and true conclusion. And you can also have a valid argument with false premises and false conclusion. That's the one we saw at the beginning. Or you can have invalid argument with false premises and false conclusion. So you see, the point is, truth and falsity in real life can only tell us about this. This is something we can immediately say is invalid, because if the premises are true and conclusion false, it cannot be valid. Nothing else. There will be questions on the exam, as you will see, such as, we know, for example, the premises are all true and the conclusion true. Is this a valid argument? What do we know? The correct answer is what? Nothing. Nothing about the validity of this argument. Because true premises and true conclusion does not mean argument is valid. Students always answer wrong on these questions. Let's say the argument has false premises and false conclusion. What do we know about validity of this argument? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. The only one combination which will tell us something about validity is this one. True premises, false conclusion. That's it. Not if argument to be unsound. Also, you should keep in mind that we only need the premises which do support the conclusion. Sometimes there may be a premise which does not support the conclusion. Let's see an example. All flowers are plants, all daisies are flowers, some daisies are black. Therefore, all daisies are plants. The first two premises are true, the third one is false. The argument is valid. Is it sound? Yes. Why? Because we don't care about the color of the daisies. It's not needed to support our conclusion. Our conclusion is supported by the first two premises. The color is completely irrelevant. So just because this is false premise only would matter if we need this premise for the conclusion. If we don't need it, we don't care. It could be false, it could be true. It doesn't spoil the argument. We're not going to see many of them, but it is also important to remember. And similarly, like just sticking false premise into otherwise valid sound argument is not going to spoil it because we only will be looking at the premises needed to support our conclusion. Few words about importance of soundness. Don't get an impression that we don't care about soundness at all. Like in this class, we're not going to pay too much attention to truth and falsity because it's logic class. But in real life, do we care whether something is true or false? Of course we do. It's a complicated topic, and also in many cases, like I said, it requires a lot of knowledge about things outside of this class. To determine whether something is true or false, even though theoretically it is determinable, sometimes may be difficult, and that is separate subject in philosophy.